She arrived in the dusty frontier town with nothing but a past full of pain, planning to leave as soon as she saved enough money. The widowed lawman hired her as a housekeeper, never expecting she would bring light back into his empty home. Between silent moments and small gestures, two wounded souls began to heal, finding in each other the courage to love again. This tender story of second chances will melt your heart and remind you that sometimes home isn't a place but a person. If you're enjoying this emotional journey, hit that like button, subscribe for more heartwarming stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The bus wheezed to a halt, expelling Maria onto the cracked sidewalk of Juniper Creek, with nothing but a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Dust swirled around her ankles, coating the hem of her faded blue dress. The town existed in sepia tones: weathered wood, sun-bleached awnings, and the relentless brown of earth that had forgotten the taste of rain. Maria pulled her shawl tighter across her shoulders, though the late summer heat rendered it unnecessary. The fabric was a shield between her and the curious glances of strangers, their eyes weighing and measuring her worth in a single sweep. The mountains loomed in the distance, sentinels of stone and silence. They reminded her of the barriers she had constructed around her heart, impenetrable, ancient, carved by winds of circumstance. She had arrived with $27.16, a silver locket containing nothing, and a collection of scars the world couldn't see. The plan had been simple: work, save, disappear. 3 steps to continue the nomadic dance she'd been performing since leaving home 5 years ago. Juniper Creek was meant to be temporary, a pause between breaths, a single note in a melody of constant motion. The general store's bell announced her entry with a cheerful dissonance that contradicted the heaviness in her chest. Inside, a bulletin board displayed faded notices, job listings, and the forgotten hopes of others who had passed through. Her fingers, calloused from 100 different labors, traced across a handwritten notice. Housekeeper needed. Sheriff's. Residence. Inquire at office. The paper had yellowed at the edges, as if time itself had begun to claim it. Maria tore it from the board, folding it into the pocket of her dress, where it settled like a stone. That night she slept on a bench in the small town square, the stars her only companions. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the whispers of her past and the uncertainty of tomorrow. In her dreams, dust became snow, then rain, then tears, elements of nature that could not be contained or controlled. Morning arrived with the scent of possibility. Maria washed her face in the public fountain, combed her long dark hair with her fingers, and straightened her dress. The silver locket hung between her collarbones, empty but somehow still heavy with the weight of memory. The sheriff's office stood at the end of Main Street, its wooden exterior weathered but maintained, unlike the peeling paint and rotting boards of neighboring structures. A sense of order amid the chaos of neglect. She paused at the door, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The woman who stared back was both familiar and foreign, dark eyes that had seen too much, a mouth that had forgotten how to form certain shapes of joy, a face that had learned to reveal nothing. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the notice crinkle in her pocket. One town, one job, one chance to gather enough to move on. She opened the door. Sheriff Daniel Blackwood didn't look up when the door opened, his attention fixed on a stack of papers spread across the worn oak desk. His presence filled the modest office, not through any deliberate attempt at domination, but through a quiet, resolute solidity that seemed to anchor the space around him. "Be with you in a moment," he said, his voice like gravel settling after a landslide. Maria stood in silence, taking inventory of the room. Everything had its place: rifles mounted on the wall, files arranged in tidy rows, a coffee pot half full on a side table. Even the dust particles suspended in the sunlight seemed to hover in deliberate patterns. When he finally looked up, his eyes were the unexpected blue of a desert sky after rain, startling in their clarity amid the earthen tones of the office. Crow's feet, etched into sun-weathered skin, softened their intensity. Silver threaded through, his dark hair at the temples, marking the passage of time with quiet dignity. "Help you with something?" he asked, setting his pen down with the precision of a man who believed in the importance of small actions. "The notice," Maria replied, retrieving the yellowed paper from her pocket. "For housekeeper." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's been up for near 3 months. Is it still available?" The sheriff studied her with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people as a matter of survival. Maria felt her defenses rise instinctively, the familiar tension of being assessed and categorized. "You're new in town," he observed, not a question. "Arrived yesterday. Planning to stay?" "Long enough." A silence expanded between them, neither uncomfortable nor welcoming, simply present, like the mountains outside or the ticking of the clock on the wall. "The job's 6 days a week," he finally said. "Houses on Willow Lane past the church, pays fair. Previous housekeeper left sudden-like when her son took ill in Colorado. I can start today." The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere, like the subtle pressure change before a storm. "You got references, family nearby?" "No family," Maria answered, offering nothing more. He nodded, as if her sparse response conveyed volumes. Perhaps it did. "Name?" he asked, reaching for a clean sheet of paper. "Maria Guerra." His pen paused momentarily, hovering above the paper as if the name itself carried weight. "Mexican?" "American," her chin lifted slightly. "Born in Arizona." The sheriff nodded again, writing something in handwriting too neat for his weathered appearance. "I'll need to know where you're staying," he said. Maria's fingers tightened around the strap of her canvas bag. "I haven't found accommodations yet." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that wasn't quite pity but resembled it enough to make her spine stiffen. "There's a room above the garage," he said after a moment. "Part of the position if you want it." The offer hung between them, unexpected and complicated. "I prefer my independence," she replied carefully. "Independence is fine," he said, standing. He was taller than she had initially judged, his movements deliberate and measured. But winter comes early in these mountains. Independence won't keep you warm when the snow falls. The practicality of his statement stripped it of charity, allowing Maria to consider it without the burden of gratitude. "The room is separate from the main house. Completely. Has its own entrance. Previous housekeeper preferred to find her own place in town. Room's been empty for years." Maria nodded once, a decisive movement. "I accept the position." "Sheriff Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "Daniel." She hesitated before allowing her smaller hand to be enveloped in his calloused grip. "Maria." He released her hand and turned to pick up a set of keys from a drawer. The silver star pinned to his chest caught the light as he moved, a symbol of authority that seemed both a part of him and separate, like the wedding band that still encircled his left ring finger, despite the absence its owner implied. "House is the white one with blue shutters," he said, placing the keys on the desk between them. "I'll be home at 6. Let yourself in and get settled." Maria took the keys, careful not to let their fingers touch again. The metal was warm from the drawer, alive in a way that cold steel shouldn't be. "Thank you, Sheriff." He nodded once, then returned to his paperwork, a dismissal as clear as any spoken word. Maria stepped back into the sunlight, keys clutched, in her palm like talismans. She looked toward the mountains, their distant peaks indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding beneath them. One town, one job. But as she followed the dirt path toward Willow Lane, she couldn't help but wonder if she had just altered the rhythm of her careful dance. The sheriff's house stood apart from its neighbors, separated by a stretch of drought-resistant scrubgrass and a fence that had once been white. Like the man himself, the structure conveyed a sense of ordered solitude, neither welcoming nor forbidding, simply self-contained. Maria approached along the gravel path, taking inventory of her new workplace. 2 stories of weathered clapboard, blue shutters faded by sun and wind, a wraparound porch with a single rocking chair facing the mountains. No flowers softened the edges, no decorative touches hinted at the personality inside. The house existed as a structure of necessity rather than comfort. The garage stood 20 paces from the main house, connected by a flagstone path. Above it, A small apartment was visible, its solitary window like a watchful eye. The main house key slid into the lock with surprising smoothness. Inside, the air hung still and quiet, preserving the scent of wood polish, coffee, and the faint mustiness of spaces not fully inhabited. Maria moved through the rooms with the careful attention of someone mapping unknown territory. The kitchen gleamed with military cleanliness, copper pots hanging in precise rows above a cast-iron stove. The living room contained furniture arranged at right angles, a leather armchair positioned to face the unlit fireplace, bookshelves organized by height and color, a desk with papers squared precisely at its center. It was the home of a man who believed in systems, in the comfort of predictability. Yet amid the order, Maria noticed the spaces where chaos had clearly been contained rather than eliminated. A basket of unfolded laundry pushed into a corner, dishes stacked beside the sink, mail piled on a hallway table, unopened envelopes, forming a small paper mountain. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms lined the narrow hallway. The master bedroom door stood ajar, revealing a half-made bed and clothes draped over a chair. The second room appeared unused, dust-coating surfaces untouched for months, perhaps years. The third room stopped her breath. Unlike the rest of the house, this space remained frozen in time, a museum dedicated to memory. A child's room, painted pale yellow, with a small bed covered in a handmade quilt. Shelves lined with books and carved wooden animals, a rocking horse in the corner, a silver hairbrush on the dresser, long strands of dark hair still tangled in its bristles. Maria backed away, closing the door softly. She had intruded on something sacred, a shrine of absence that made her heart constrict with unwelcome recognition. Downstairs, she found cleaning supplies in a pantry closet and set to work, not because the house was particularly dirty, but because work provided clarity, a defense against the uncomfortable intimacy of learning too much about the man whose space she had entered. By late afternoon, she had scrubbed the kitchen to a higher shine, washed and folded the abandoned laundry, organized the mail by date and sender, and dusted every surface except those in the preserved bedroom, which she left untouched. The sun had begun its descent behind the mountains when she finally carried her canvas bag across the flagstone path to the apartment above the garage. The key stuck slightly in this lock, requiring a firm push to yield. The apartment consisted of a single room with a small attached bathroom. A narrow bed with a metal frame stood against one wall, a nightstand beside it. A kitchenette occupied the opposite corner, mini refrigerator, hot plate, and a sink barely large enough to wash a dinner plate. A table with 2 chairs sat beneath, the window which offered a view of the mountains and the edge of town beyond. Maria placed her bag on the bed, then opened the window to release the stale air. A breeze entered, carrying the scent of sage and dust. The room felt temporary, transitional, which suited her purposes perfectly. She unpacked her few possessions, arranging them with the same precision she had observed in the main house. Clothes folded in the small dresser, toothbrush in a cup by the bathroom sink, a single photograph, its edges worn soft from handling, placed face down in the drawer of the nightstand. The silver locket remained around her neck, a weight so familiar she no longer noticed its presence. At exactly 6 o'clock, the sound of tires on gravel announced the sheriff's return. Maria watched from her window as he emerged from his vehicle, a man stepping from one position of authority to another, the silver star on his chest catching the evening light like a distant star. She descended the exterior stairs to meet him, determined to establish professional boundaries from the beginning. "Your house is in order, Sheriff," she said by way of greeting. He nodded, eyes taking in her appearance, hair now neatly braided, hands slightly reddened from cleaning solutions, posture straight as a fence post. "You found everything you need?" "Yes." He glanced toward the apartment above the garage. "Room suit you?" "It's adequate." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. High praise. Maria felt an unexpected urge to smile in return, but suppressed it. "I'll prepare dinner now, if you'd like." "Already ate at the diner." He paused, seeming to reconsider, but coffee would be welcome. She nodded and turned toward the house, aware of his presence following behind her, not threatening but solid, unavoidable as the mountains themselves. In the kitchen, she moved with efficient precision, measuring coffee grounds, heating water, arranging a cup and saucer on a tray with mathematical symmetry. The sheriff sat at the kitchen table, hat placed beside him, watching her movements, with the same attention he might give to evidence at a crime scene. "You've done this before," he observed. "Many times," she answered, not looking up from her task. When she placed the coffee before him, their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them, not understanding, not yet, but recognition of a shared quality. Perhaps it was the careful way they both moved through space, as if accustomed to navigating around invisible barriers. "Thank you, Mrs. Guerra." "Miss," she corrected, "and Maria is fine." He nodded, accepting the information without comment or curiosity. "Good night then, Maria." "Good night, Sheriff." She left him sitting in the kitchen, the steam from his coffee rising like the ghosts that seemed to inhabit the spaces between them. Back in her room above the garage, Maria stood at the window watching darkness settle over the landscape. The mountains disappeared first, then the edges of town until only lights remained, small beacons of human presence in the vast darkness. One of those lights shone from the kitchen window of the main house, where a man sat alone at a table, surrounded by order he had created, but couldn't seem to inhabit fully. Maria turned away from the window, from the uncomfortable parallel between the sheriff's solitude and her own. One town, one job, one chance. Nothing had changed, she told herself. This was still temporary. Yet, as she lay on the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Juniper Creek settling into night, she couldn't ignore the whisper of something shifting, like earth preparing to yield after drought. The rhythm of work provided structure Maria hadn't realized she craved. Each morning she rose before dawn, watching from her window as the mountains emerged from darkness, first as silhouettes, then as textured forms revealing their ancient contours in the growing light. By 6:30 she was in the main house, coffee brewing as Sheriff Blackwood moved through his own morning ritual with mechanical precision. They existed in parallel, occupying the same space without intersection. She at the stove preparing eggs and toast, he at the table reviewing notes or cleaning his service weapon with methodical attention. Words between them remained functional, necessary. Shopping needs doing. List is on the counter. Mail came. Leave it on my desk. Each day she cleaned and ordered the house that seemed determined to resist permanent organization. Each evening the sheriff returned at 6, sometimes with the dust of the desert on his boots, occasionally with the tense set to his shoulders that suggested conflict managed rather than resolved. 2 weeks passed in this manner, a dance of avoidance and routine, until the box fell. Maria had been cleaning the hall closet, organizing the haphazard collection of items that had been hastily shoved onto its shelves. The cardboard box, placed too close to the edge, succumbed to gravity when she removed a stack of folded blankets, its contents scattered across the hardwood floor, photographs mostly, some framed, others loose and curling at the edges. Papers, with official seals. A woman's scarf, the blue fabric faded but still soft. Maria knelt to gather the items, her hands moving carefully to avoid damage. The photographs captured moments of a life she had not been part of, but could piece together through these visual fragments. A woman with dark hair and eyes that smiled before her lips, wearing a white dress beside a younger Sheriff Blackwood. The same woman, her belly rounded beneath a summer dress, standing in front of the house that was now Maria's workplace. A baby, then a toddler with her mother's eyes and her father's serious expression. Family portraits showing the passage of years. The girl growing, the woman's smile becoming more subdued, the sheriff's eyes reflecting something that looked increasingly like worry. Then no more photographs of the woman. Only the sheriff and a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, standing beside a Christmas tree, his hand on her shoulder, her smile uncertain. The final photograph showed the girl alone, sitting on the porch. Steps, a book open on her lap, unaware of the camera capturing her profile against the backdrop of mountains. "Find what you were looking for?" The sheriff's voice from the doorway startled her. She hadn't heard him enter, hadn't expected him, home for hours yet. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly returning the photographs to the box. "Day it fell. I didn't mean to pry." He remained in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Maria felt heat rise to her cheeks, the uncomfortable sensation of being caught in transgression. "My wife, Elena," he said unexpectedly, nodding toward one of the framed photographs Maria still held, "and our daughter, Sophia." The offering of information, however minimal, felt significant. "They're beautiful," Maria said softly, placing the frame carefully back in the box. "Elena died of cancer 8 years ago." His voice remained even, factual. "Sophia lives with her aunt in Denver, my sister-in-law. Better for a girl to have a woman's influence growing up." The explanation emerged unprompted, as if the sheriff had recited it many times before. A story stripped of emotion through repetition. Maria nodded, understanding more than he had actually revealed. The preserved bedroom, the hollowness. That seemed to echo beneath the ordered surfaces of the house, the wedding band he still wore. "I lost people too," she found herself saying, the words emerging before she could contain them. The sheriff's eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise crossing his features at this voluntary offering. Maria stood, brushing dust from her skirt, regretting the momentary lapse in her careful guard. "I'll finish the closet and start dinner." He nodded, accepting her retreat. "I need to head back to the office. Problem with some cattle rustling on the Peterson property. I'll leave a plate in the oven." He paused at the front door, turning back with an expression that suggested he wanted to say something more, but couldn't find the words for it. Instead, he simply nodded again before leaving. Maria returned the box to the closet shelf, positioning it firmly away from the edge. But the images remained in her mind as she moved through the evening routine. The gradual fading of Elena's smile, the tentative posture of Sophia as she grew under the shadow of her mother's illness, the increasing isolation visible in the sheriff's eyes. That night, for the first time since arriving in Juniper Creek, Maria removed the photograph from her nightstand drawer. A family portrait similar to the one she had discovered in the sheriff's closet, though considerably more worn from travel and handling. Her mother and father, faces creased with lines of laughter and hardship in equal measure, her brother Miguel, tall and protective beside her, and herself, 16 and unaware of how quickly everything would change. 3 months after this photograph, the accident had claimed her parents and brother, leaving Maria with nothing but this image and a silver locket that had belonged to her mother, empty because she had never found anything worthy of placing inside it. She traced her finger over the familiar faces, feeling the familiar ache of absence. Perhaps it was this shared experience of loss that made her place the sheriff's dinner in the oven with extra care that evening, adding a slice of apple pie purchased from the bakery in town. When she heard his vehicle returning late that night, Maria remained at her window, watching as the kitchen light illuminated his solitary figure moving through his evening ritual. One town, one job. But the mantra felt hollow now, contaminated by an unwelcome sense of connection. Autumn arrived with unexpected suddenness, painting the scrubby landscape in muted golds and reds. The air carried the promise of coming cold, the crisp edge that made Maria add another blanket to her bed at night. 3 weeks had passed since the falling box incident. Something had shifted between them, not in words or obvious actions, but in the quality of silence that surrounded their parallel routines. Where before the silence had been empty, now it felt inhabited by unspoken awareness. The sheriff began lingering over breakfast, his coffee cooling as he occasionally glanced up from his reports to observe Maria's movements around the kitchen. She found herself preparing his eggs exactly as she had discovered he preferred them, whites. Fully cooked, yolk still soft without being asked. Small modifications to their routine emerged without discussion. A second chair at the kitchen table was pulled out slightly, an unspoken invitation that Maria sometimes accepted, sitting briefly to drink her own coffee before returning to work. The sheriff started removing his boots at the door without prompting, respecting her freshly mopped floors. One morning, she arrived to find wild sunflowers in a mason jar on the kitchen counter, their bright yellow faces incongruous against the practical backdrop of the sheriff's house. "Noticed them growing by the creek," he said without looking, up from his newspaper when she paused to touch the soft petals. "Thought they brightened the place," Maria nodded, unable to articulate why the simple gesture made her throat tighten. The town began to take notice of her presence. At the general store, the owner greeted her by name. The baker asked if the sheriff had enjoyed the apple pie, suggesting he might prefer the peach cobbler next time. The librarian offered a card, without Maria requesting one. Small tendrils of connection, threatening to take root. On Sundays, her one day off, Maria took to wandering the outskirts of town, following dry creek beds and deer paths into the foothills. The mountains drew her with their patient silence, their indifference to human concerns providing a strange comfort. It was during one such walk that storm clouds gathered with the swift intensity particular to mountain weather. The temperature dropped, wind rising to bend the sagebrush and scatter dust in spiraling patterns. Maria turned back toward town, but the first heavy drops began falling when she was still a mile from shelter. Within minutes, the path became slick with mud, her thin jacket soaked through. The rain fell in sheets, obscuring her vision beyond a few feet. Lightning fractured the sky, followed instantly by thunder that vibrated through the ground beneath her feet. A vehicle approached, headlights cutting through the downpour. It slowed beside her, the passenger window rolling down to reveal Sheriff Blackwood's concerned face. "Get in," he called over the storm's roar. Pride warred briefly with practicality before Maria pulled the door open, sliding into the seat with rainwater streaming from her clothes and hair. "Thank you," she said, teeth chattering slightly. He reached behind the seat, retrieving a wool blanket that he handed her without comment. The heater blasted warm air as they drove in silence back toward town, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. "Thought I might find you out this way," he said finally. Maria wrapped the blanket tighter, absorbing its warmth. "You were looking for me?" Storm came up sudden. Remembered you mentioned walking in the hills on Sundays. The realization that he had been listening, remembering small details she shared, created a warmth separate from the blanket or heater. Instead of driving directly home, the sheriff pulled up in front of Juniper Creek's only diner. "Best to get something hot in you," he said, his tone making it more suggestion than order. Inside, the diner offered refuge from the storm. Warm light, the scent of coffee and grilled food, the murmur of conversation creating a cocoon of humanity. Amid nature's fury, they slid into a booth near the back, Maria still wrapped in the blanket despite the warmth of the building. A waitress approached with practiced efficiency, her eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of the sheriff with company. "Regular, Sheriff?" "2 coffees, 2 specials," he answered. When the waitress departed, silence settled between them. Different from the silence of parallel routines in the house. This silence asked for something, waited for something. "How long have you been sheriff here?" Maria asked, offering words to fill the expectant gap. 15 years, he replied. "Before that, deputy in Colorado. It seems peaceful, except for the cattle rustling." A faint smile touched his lips. "Mostly is. Odd dispute between neighbors, occasional drunk causing trouble at the saloon, missing cattle." "Why did you come here from Colorado?" He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl. "Eleanor wanted somewhere quieter to raise Sophia, away from the problems of bigger places." The irony hung unspoken between them, how the search for safety had ultimately provided no protection against illness, against loss. "Where were you headed?" he asked unexpectedly. "When you came through Juniper Creek." Maria's hands tightened around her coffee cup, the ceramic warm against her cold fingers. "I wasn't headed anywhere particular. Just away from something then." His perception unsettled her. She had grown accustomed to being unnoticed, unremarkable, a shadow passing, through communities without leaving impressions. "We all have things we're leaving behind," she said finally. He nodded, accepting this non-answer with unexpected grace, "and reasons we might stay." The statement hung between them as their food arrived, simple plates of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Steam rose from the hearty fare, carrying the scent of comfort and stability. They ate in companionable silence, the storm continuing its assault outside. Through the rain-streaked windows, Juniper Creek appeared transformed, its dusty edges softened, its harsh angles rendered gentle by the filtering curtain of water. "Town looks different in the rain," Maria observed. "Everything does," the sheriff replied, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Sometimes we need to see things through different conditions to understand what they really are." The metaphor settled around Maria like the blanket he had offered her, both comforting and constricting. When they finished eating, the sheriff insisted on paying despite her protest. Outside, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, the violent energy of the storm spent. As they drove home through puddle-strewn streets, Maria found herself studying his profile. The strong line of his jaw, the furrow between his brows that never fully relaxed, the silver at his temples catching the dim light from the dashboard. At the house, he walked her to the stairs leading to her apartment, pausing at the bottom while she ascended 3 steps before turning back. "Thank you," she said, "for finding me in the storm." Something shifted in his expression, a softening. Around the eyes, a slight relaxation of the perpetual tension he carried. "Get some rest, Maria." She nodded, continuing up the stairs with the strange sensation of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Inside her small room, she hung the borrowed blanket over a chair to dry and changed into warm clothes. The silver locket felt unusually heavy against her skin as she prepared for bed. One town, one job, but the mantra had lost its power, its certainty wavering like the landscape viewed through rain. The arrival of October brought an unexpected burst of activity to Juniper Creek. What Maria had assumed to be a permanently sleepy town suddenly stirred with preparations for its annual harvest festival, an event mentioned with reverence by locals as if it were a national holiday rather than a small community gathering. "Been happening for 87 years, explained Mrs. Abernathy at the general store as Maria purchased supplies. "Started during the Depression to boost morale. Now it's the biggest event of the year." The town square transformed gradually, stalls erected, decorations hung, stages built for music and dancing. Even the sheriff's routine adjusted to accommodate additional duties, his hours growing longer as the festival approached. "More people means more potential for trouble," he explained one evening as Maria set his dinner before him. "Folks from neighboring towns come in, old rivalries resurface, too much drinking." "It sounds almost exciting," Maria remarked, a hint of teasing in her voice that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Excitement's overrated in my line of work." The exchange, light, almost playful, exemplified the gradual evolution of their interactions. Where once words were utilitarian bridges between necessary tasks, now conversation emerged in small, careful increments. She learned he preferred reading history to fiction, took his coffee black from habit rather than preference, and could name every constellation visible in the night sky. He discovered she hummed, when deep in thought, preferred rainy days to sunny ones, and could identify plants with medicinal properties growing wild in the foothills. Small revelations, cautiously offered and received. 3 days before the festival, Maria returned from shopping to find an unfamiliar car parked in front of the sheriff's house. The vehicle, sleek, expensive, city-appropriate, looked alien against the backdrop of Juniper Creek's weathered charm. As she approached, voices drifted from the open windows of the main house. A woman's voice, high and modulated with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to being heard, and the lower rumble of the sheriff's responses. Maria hesitated. At the bottom of the garage stairs, grocery bags heavy in her arms. The boundary between employee and whatever undefined role she had begun to occupy suddenly reasserted itself with painful clarity. The front door opened before she could retreat to her apartment. A woman emerged onto the porch, her tailored dress and carefully arranged hair marking her as distinctly non-local. Behind her came the sheriff, his posture stiff in a way Maria hadn't seen in weeks, and between them, a girl perhaps 11 years old with dark hair falling in waves around a heart-shaped face. She stood slightly apart from both adults, her expression carefully neutral in a way that made Maria's chest tighten with recognition. The sheriff spotted Maria by the garage and raised a hand in beckoning. With no graceful way to avoid the encounter, Maria approached, conscious of her work-worn appearance in contrast to the polished woman on the porch. Maria, the sheriff said, his voice carrying a formality that had been absent in recent weeks. I'd like you to meet my sister-in-law, Catherine Harris, and my daughter Sophia. They've come for the festival. Catherine Harris extended a manicured hand, her smile professional rather than warm. So you're the new housekeeper. Daniel mentioned you've been keeping things in order. Maria accepted the handshake, noting the quick assessment in the other woman's eyes. It's nice to meet you. Her attention shifted to the girl, who regarded her with solemn curiosity. Sophia Blackwood had her mother's dark coloring from the photographs, but her father's watchful eyes, too serious for a child, too perceptive. Hello, Maria offered gently. Sophia nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement. We'll be staying through the weekend, Catherine announced. I've already put our bags in the guest room. The statement contained an implicit territory marking that made the sheriff's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. I'll prepare dinner for 3 then, Maria said, eager to retreat from the complicated dynamics swirling around the porch. That would be lovely, Catherine replied with the automatic graciousness of someone accustomed to being served. Sophia has become quite the picky eater lately, but I'm sure she'll manage whatever you prepare. The girl's expression flickered. Briefly, a flash of something like embarrassment or frustration before settling back into careful neutrality. I should get these groceries inside, Maria said, lifting the bag slightly. The sheriff nodded, a silent dismissal that carried undertones of apology she might have imagined. In the kitchen, Maria unpacked the groceries with mechanical efficiency, mind racing to adjust menus for additional people and alter cleaning schedules to accommodate guests. The voices from the living room drifted in snippets through the partially open door, still keeping her bedroom exactly the same. My house, Catherine. Can't move forward while clinging to... Not here to discuss this again. Maria turned on the tap to drown out the conversation, uncomfortable with her inadvertent eavesdropping. As she washed vegetables for dinner, a movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. Sophia stood in the doorway, watching with the silent intensity of a small bird. Hello again, Maria said, drying her hands on a towel. Would you like something to drink? Water? Lemonade? The girl shook her head but didn't leave. I'm making chicken with roasted vegetables for dinner, Maria continued, moving to the refrigerator. Is there anything you particularly like or don't like? Sophia remained silent, but her gaze tracked Maria's movements with undisguised curiosity. I don't actually talk much either, Maria offered conversationally while retrieving ingredients. Your father and I can go whole days barely saying more than good morning and good night. This earned her a slight widening of the girl's eyes, surprise or disbelief, perhaps both. Would you like to help? Maria asked, gesturing toward the vegetables arranged on the cutting board. You could wash the potatoes. After a hesitation that seemed to contain complex calculations, Sophia stepped fully into the kitchen and approached the sink. Maria handed her 3 potatoes and a vegetable brush, demonstrating the scrubbing motion before returning to her own preparations. They worked in companionable silence, Maria chopping carrots and onions, Sophia methodically cleaning each potato with the serious concentration of someone performing a vital task. Dad says you live above the garage, the girl said suddenly, her voice softer than Maria had expected. Yes, I do. Is it lonely? The question, simple yet penetrating, caught Maria off guard. She considered her answer carefully, aware of the deeper currents beneath the child's inquiry. Sometimes, she admitted, but sometimes being alone is peaceful. Sophia nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Aunt Catherine thinks being alone is the worst thing that can happen to someone. And what do you think? The girl shrugged one shoulder, returning her attention to the potato in her hands. I think people can be lonelier in a room full of people than by themselves sometimes. The observation, too perceptive, too mature, made Maria's heart constrict, with a mixture of sadness and recognition. That's very true, she said softly. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that transcended age and circumstance, a recognition of shared experience despite vastly different lives. Catherine's voice called from the living room. Sophia, where have you gotten to? The spell broke. Sophia placed the last potato on the counter, carefully wiping her hands on the towel Maria offered. "Thank you for your help," Maria said. The girl nodded once before slipping out of the kitchen, leaving behind an impression far more substantial than her slight physical presence. Dinner that evening was an exercise in carefully maintained facades. Catherine dominated the conversation with stories of Denver society and Sophia's academic achievements, while the sheriff responded with appropriate noises of interest. Sophia pushed food around her plate, occasionally glancing toward Maria, who moved efficiently between kitchen and dining room with the practiced invisibility of service. Later, after the dishes were cleared and Catherine had retired to the guest room with a declared headache, Maria found the sheriff on the porch, staring at the mountains now silhouetted against the night sky. "Will you need anything else tonight?" she asked, preparing to return to her apartment. He shook his head, then paused. "I apologize for Catherine. She can be—" "There's no need to apologize," Maria interjected gently. "Sophia helped you in the kitchen," he observed, not a question. "She did. She's very capable." A complicated emotion crossed his features, pride tinged with sadness. "She doesn't talk much anymore, not since her mother died. Not to me, anyway." The admission hung in the space between them, heavy with implications. "Grief changes how we communicate," Maria said carefully. "Sometimes words feel inadequate." He turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the porch light. "You understand that?" "Yes." The simple acknowledgement seemed to release something in his posture, a fractional softening of the tension he had carried since his visitor's arrival. "Good night, Sheriff." "Daniel," he corrected quietly. "When we're not—" He gestured vaguely toward the house, the official roles they occupied. "Daniel," she repeated, testing the shape of his name. "Good night." As she crossed to her apartment, Maria glanced back to see him still standing on the porch, a solitary figure framed against the warm light from within, connected to but separate from the house and those it contained. In her room she removed the silver locket, turning it between her fingers, before placing it on the nightstand rather than in the drawer. The empty pendant caught the moonlight through her window, gleaming with possibility rather than absence. One town, one job. But the familiar refrain sounded hollow now, unable to contain the complex reality that had begun to take shape around her. The Harvest Festival transformed Juniper Creek from a dusty, unremarkable town into a vibrant celebration of community. Colored lanterns strung between buildings cast warm pools of light across the square. The scent of barbecue smoke, caramel apples and cinnamon hung in the air. Music from a small band on the wooden stage provided a cheerful backdrop to the crowd's murmur. Maria moved through the festivities with cautious pleasure, observing more than participating. 3 months in Juniper Creek had familiarized her with faces and names, but she remained on the periphery of true belonging, a position she had carefully maintained until tonight. "You must try the apple cider," Mrs. Abernathy insisted, pressing a warm cup into Maria's hands. "Henry adds a secret ingredient he won't tell anyone about." "Maria," called the baker, waving from his stall, "I saved you a slice of the blue ribbon pie." Each greeting, each inclusion, chipped away at her carefully constructed distance. She spotted the sheriff, Daniel, across the square, his uniform making him easily identifiable among the crowd. Unlike his usual solitary patrol, he moved through clusters of people with Sophia at his side, his hand occasionally resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture that seemed both protective and uncertain. Catherine walked several paces ahead, stopping frequently to engage in conversation with locals who appeared simultaneously flattered and intimidated by her sophisticated attention. Maria avoided their path, not wishing to intrude on the family outing. Instead, she wandered toward the edge of the festival where craft stalls displayed local artistry, quilts with intricate patterns, hand-carved wooden figures, jewelry made from polished stones gathered from the riverbed. A small table covered with simple silver pieces caught her attention. An elderly man with hands gnarled by arthritis and age sat behind the display, his weathered face breaking into a smile as she approached. "Admiring my work, miss?" Maria nodded, fingers hovering over a delicate bracelet. "It's beautiful." "Been silversmithing for 60 years, he said proudly. "Learned from my father, who learned from his. Not many appreciate the old ways anymore." Her fingers moved to her locket, a habitual gesture when thoughtful. The old man's eyes followed the movement. "That's fine craftsmanship," he observed. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Maria unfastened the chain, placing the locket in his palm. He examined it with professional appreciation, turning it over to study the engraving. On the back, a simple pattern of intertwined vines. "Mexican silver," he noted. "Beautiful work. Looks empty, though." "It is," Maria confirmed, accepting the locket back. "I never found the right thing to put inside." The old man's eyes crinkled with wisdom. "Lockets aren't meant to stay empty. Young lady, their purpose is to keep precious things close to your heart." Before she could respond, a child's voice called from behind her. "Maria!" She turned to find Sophia approaching, slightly breathless, as if she had hurried away from her father and aunt. "Hello, Sophia. Are you enjoying the festival?" The girl nodded, her eyes moving curiously to the silversmith's display. "These are pretty." "Mr. Maria realized she didn't know the craftsman's name. "Jenkins," he supplied with a smile for Sophia. "Sam Jenkins." "Mr. Jenkins makes all of these by hand," Maria explained. Sophia's eyes widened with appropriate impression. "Even the little animals." "Especially those," he confirmed, pushing forward a tray of small silver figures. "Birds, deer, foxes, and horses no larger than a thumbnail. Pick one up if you'd like. They're meant to be touched." With careful reverence, Sophia selected a tiny owl, its features rendered with remarkable detail despite its size. "The owl represents wisdom," Mr. Jenkins told her. "The ability to see what others miss in the darkness." Sophia turned the figure in her palm, expression solemn. "My mom used to read me stories about talking animals. The owl was always the wisest." The simple statement, offered without apparent emotion, conveyed volumes about loss and memory. "Sophia!" Catherine's voice cut through the festival noise, sharp with concern or annoyance, perhaps both. She approached with quick steps, Daniel following at a more measured pace. "You can't wander off like that," Catherine scolded, taking Sophia's arm. "Your father and I were worried." "I was just looking at the silver animals," Sophia explained, her voice diminishing to its usual quiet tone. "With Maria." Catherine's gaze shifted to Maria, a flicker of something complicated passing across her features. "I see. Well, the fireworks are about to start. We should find a good spot." Daniel reached them, nodding a greeting to Maria and the silversmith. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Catherine answered before anyone else could speak. Sophia was just exploring. His eyes moved to his daughter, who still held the tiny silver owl in her palm. "Found something you like?" Sophia nodded, extending her hand to show him. "It's an owl. Mr. Jenkins says they see things others miss in the dark." Something in Daniel's expression softened as he examined the figure. He reached for his wallet, but Mr. Jenkins waved him off. "A gift for the young lady," the silversmith insisted. "Not often I get to share my work with someone who appreciates it properly." Gratitude and pride mingled in Daniel's face as he looked from the craftsman to his daughter. "What do you say, Sophia?" "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," the girl said, carefully tucking the owl into the pocket of her dress. "We should go," Catherine interjected, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jenkins. Maria, enjoy your evening." The dismissal, though politely phrased, was unmistakable. Daniel's expression tightened slightly, but he said nothing to contradict his sister-in-law. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said to Maria, a simple statement that somehow carried more meaning than its words suggested. As they walked away, Sophia glanced back once, offering a small wave that Maria returned. "Nice family," Mr. Jenkins observed when they had gone. "The girl has old eyes, though, seen too much for her years." Maria nodded, unable to disagree. "The sheriff's been alone too long," the old man continued, his hands busy rearranging his display. "Town's been waiting for someone to change that." Heat rose to Maria's cheeks. "I'm just his housekeeper," Mr. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "If you say so, miss." Before she could formulate a response, the first firework exploded overhead, drawing exclamations from the crowd. Gold and red sparks illuminated the town square, reflecting in windows and the upturned faces of onlookers. Maria moved toward the center of the gathering, finding a place to stand at its edge. Each burst of light revealed fragments of the community, children on parents' shoulders, couples with arms linked, the elderly in chairs brought specifically for the occasion. Across the square she spotted Daniel, Catherine, and Sophia. The girl sat on her father's shoulders despite being almost too old for such accommodation, her face tilted skyward in wonder. Daniel's hands steadied her with gentle assurance, his own gaze directed upward. Catherine stood slightly apart, her posture suggesting reluctant participation in what she perhaps considered provincial entertainment. A particularly spectacular blue starburst illuminated the scene, and in that momentary brightness, Daniel's eyes found Maria's across the distance. Despite the crowd between them, despite the noise and light and activity, a connection sparked, a recognition, an acknowledgement. Then darkness returned, and the moment passed. Later, as the festival wound down and families drifted homeward, Maria found herself walking alone along Willow Lane. The night air had cooled, carrying the scent of extinguished candles and lingering sweetness from the food stalls. At the sheriff's house, lights still burned in the living room windows. Maria quietly made her way to the garage stairs, not wishing to intrude on the family evening. "Maria." Daniel's voice stopped her, emerging from the shadows of the porch where he sat alone in the rocking chair. "I thought you'd still be at the festival," she said, changing direction to approach the porch. Catherine took Sophia to bed. The excitement wore her out. He gestured to the porch swing. "Join me?" The invitation hung between them, simple words carrying complicated implications. Maria hesitated briefly before ascending the porch steps and settling onto the swing, its gentle creaking the only sound for several moments. "Sophia enjoyed meeting you properly," Daniel said finally. "She mentioned you let her help with dinner." "Yesterday." "She's a thoughtful child." "Yes." Pride and sadness mingled in the single syllable. "Catherine thinks I should sell this house, move to Denver to be closer to Sophia." The statement emerged without preamble, surprising in its directness. "What do you think?" Maria asked carefully. Daniel's gaze fixed on the distant mountains, barely visible as darker shadows against the night sky. "I think roots matter. This town, this house, they're part of who I am, part of what I can offer Sophia, even if she only visits occasionally. And she has memories of her mother here," Maria observed softly. He nodded, the motion barely perceptible in the darkness. "Catherine believes those memories are what's holding us back, that we need to start fresh somewhere else." "Sometimes carrying the past with us isn't the same as being trapped by it," Maria said, the words emerging from some deep place of understanding within herself. "Sometimes it's just honoring what came before while still moving forward." Daniel turned to look at her then, his expression hidden by shadow but his attention palpable. "You understand that distinction?" "I've had practice," she admitted. Silence settled between them, not the awkward silence of strangers nor the comfortable silence of old friends, but something in between, something still taking shape. "Where were you before Juniper Creek?" he asked, the question gentle rather than interrogative. Maria's hands found the silver locket at her throat, a habitual gesture when approaching difficult territory. "Many places, nowhere for very long." "Running from something?" "At first," she acknowledged, "then just running." He didn't press for details, offering instead the space for her to continue or not, a gift of patience she hadn't expected. "My family died in a car accident when I was 16, she continued after a moment, words forming carefully in the darkness. "Drunk driver. I survived because I stayed home with a cold that day." Daniel remained silent, but she felt his attention, sharpen, felt the weight of his understanding. "I lived with my grandmother until I finished high school, but she passed soon after. There was nothing holding me anywhere after that. So I started moving, never staying long enough to—" She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the deliberate disconnection she had maintained for years. To risk losing something again, he finished for her. Maria nodded, grateful for his perception. I understand that, Daniel said quietly. After Elena died, I considered leaving too. Starting over somewhere, no one knew us. No one had watched her get sick, watched me fail to save her. Why did you stay? His silhouette shifted slightly as he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Partly for Sophia. I wanted her to have some continuity. Partly because running felt like admitting defeat, and partly because this place is woven into who I am. The good and the painful parts both. The admission, honest, vulnerable, created a bridge between them, an understanding built on shared experience despite different circumstances. The festival was nice, Maria said after a moment, offering a shift to lighter ground. Daniel accepted the transition with what sounded like a brief chuckle. Juniper Creek's claim to fame. 3 days of excitement to sustain us through the quiet months ahead. The quiet has its appeal too, she observed. Yes, he agreed, his voice softening. It does. They sat in companionable silence as the town settled into night around them, the distant mountains standing guard against the horizon. The silver locket rested warm against Maria's skin, no longer a weight but a presence, a connection to what had been and what might yet be. One town, one job. But as she sat beside Daniel in the gentle darkness, Maria found herself unwilling to complete the familiar refrain. The day after Catherine and Sophia's departure brought the first significant snowfall of the season. Maria woke to a transformed landscape, the dusty browns and faded greens replaced by pristine white that glittered beneath a clear sky. She wrapped herself in her warmest sweater before crossing to the main house, breath-forming clouds in the crisp morning air. Inside, she found Daniel already awake, staring out the kitchen window at the altered world. First snow, he observed, as she entered. Earlier than usual. It's beautiful, Maria said, moving to start the coffee. He nodded, turning from the window with an expression that seemed lighter than it had been during his family's visit. Changes everything it touches. The observation hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the literal snowfall. Their routine resumed with subtle differences, small adjustments to accommodate the weather and the lingering effects of the conversations shared during the festival. Daniel began staying for dinner more often, rather than eating at the diner. Maria found reasons to linger in the main house into the evening, reading borrowed books from his shelf by the fire before returning to her apartment above the garage. The sheriff's extended absences became occasions for quiet concern, rather than relief from supervision. When cattle rustling in the county's northern reaches kept him away overnight, Maria found herself watching from her window until late, the mountains dark and imposing beyond the illuminated square of her room. Juniper Creek itself seemed to contract around them as winter advanced, the community drawing inward, social activity moving from public spaces to the warmth of homes and the diner. Main Street remained quiet, except for necessary errands, the town square deserted until the snow was cleared. It was during one such quiet afternoon, with Daniel away investigating a dispute at the Peterson Ranch, that Mrs. Abernathy's comments in the general store first alerted Maria to the whispers. Such a positive change in the sheriff these past months, the older woman remarked as she rang up Maria's purchases. The whole town's noticed how he smiles more these days. Maria nodded noncommittally, placing canned goods in her basket. So of course Catherine Harris made her opinions quite clear before she left, Mrs. Abernathy continued, her voice lowering conspiratorially despite the empty store. Mentioned to several people at the festival that she found it inappropriate, a single man and woman living on the same property without proper, well, you understand. Heat rose to Maria's cheeks. The sheriff is my employer. I live above the garage, not in his house. Oh, I know that, dear. Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. Most of us are just happy to see life coming back into his eyes. 5 years is a long time to grieve alone. 7, Maria corrected automatically. His wife died 7 years ago. The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose slightly at this evidence of private knowledge. So of course, 7. My point is, don't let Catherine's city notions trouble you. Juniper Creek makes its own judgments. The conversation left Maria unsettled, aware for the first time of how her presence in the sheriff's household might be perceived by others. The possibility that she had inadvertently complicated Daniel's relationship with his daughter and sister-in-law weighed heavily as she walked home through the snowy streets. That evening, she prepared dinner with particular care, a warming beef stew that filled the kitchen with savory aromas, then set only one place at the table before retreating to her apartment earlier than usual. From her window she watched Daniel's return, the headlights of his vehicle cutting through early darkness as he pulled into the driveway. The kitchen light illuminated his solitary figure as he discovered the meal she had left, his silhouette a study in isolation against the warm backdrop. Maria turned away, unwilling to observe what felt increasingly like an intrusion on private moments. The following morning she maintained a careful professional distance as Daniel ate breakfast, limiting conversation to necessary exchanges about household matters. "Is everything all right?" he asked finally, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Of course," she replied, wiping an already clean counter. "You seem—" He paused, searching for the appropriate word. "Distant." Maria stilled, dishcloth in hand, her back to him. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that your sister-in-law had concerns about our arrangement." The silence that followed her statement felt charged with unspoken complexities. "Catherine has many opinions," Daniel said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "most of which I've learned to disregard." "Still," Maria continued, turning to face him, "perhaps we should be more mindful of appearances. For Sophia's sake, if nothing else." His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she clarified quickly. "Only that I wouldn't want my presence here to cause difficulties with your family." Daniel studied her with the careful attention she had first noticed in the sheriff's office months earlier, the assessment of a man accustomed to looking beneath surfaces. "My family situation was complicated long before you arrived, Maria," he said finally. "Catherine has always believed she knows what's best for Sophia. Sometimes she's right. Often she's not." "She's Sophia's primary caregiver," Maria pointed out gently. "Her opinion matters." "Yes," he acknowledged, "but so does mine. And I've seen how Sophia responded to you, more openly than she has to anyone since her mother died." The observation hung between them, both compliment and complication. "I should finish the laundry," Maria said after a moment, stepping back from the conversation, from the dangerous territory of becoming essential in a child's life, in a man's household. Daniel stood, gathering his hat and jacket from the hook by the door. "I need to check on the Sullivan property. Their fence keeps coming down and they're convinced it's vandalism rather than weather." The return to mundane topics provided momentary relief, a retreat to safer ground. At the door he paused, turning back with an expression of careful consideration. "There's a call scheduled with Sophia tonight at 7. She asked if you would be there." The simple statement carried complicated implications. The girl's growing attachment, Catherine's likely disapproval, the blurring of boundaries between employee and something undefined. "Of course," Maria replied, unable to refuse the child's request despite her misgivings. "If you're comfortable with that." Daniel nodded once, a decisive movement. "I am." After he left, Maria moved through her cleaning routine with mechanical precision, mind circling around the evolving situation. What had begun as a temporary position in a convenient location had become something far more complicated, a web of connections she had neither anticipated nor sought. That evening, she arrived at the main house precisely at 7, hair neatly braided, wearing her one dress that wasn't faded from wear. Daniel had set up the video call on his laptop at the kitchen table, the screen showing the connecting symbol. When Sophia's face appeared, her solemn expression immediately brightened at the sight of both adults. "Maria, Dad said you might be there." "Hello, Sophia," Maria replied, taking the chair Daniel offered beside him. "How are you?" The girl launched into a description of school projects and books she had read recently, speaking more animatedly than Maria had witnessed during her visit. Daniel listened with evident pleasure, asking occasional questions that prompted further elaboration. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, the three of them finding a rhythm that felt both novel and natural. Sophia showed them a drawing she had made of the mountains behind Juniper Creek, the owl figurine from Mr. Jenkins, perched prominently on her desk where the camera could capture it. "Aunt Catherine says I should put it away in my jewelry box," Sophia confided, "but I like seeing it. It reminds me of the festival." A shadow crossed Daniel's features at this evidence of Catherine's continued management of even small details of his daughter's life. "It's your special treasure," Maria said. "You should keep it where it makes you happy." Sophia nodded seriously, as if Maria had confirmed an important principle. When the call ended 30 minutes later, a comfortable silence settled in. The kitchen, the kind that follows moments of genuine connection. "She's different with you," Daniel observed, closing the laptop. "More herself." Maria busied herself with preparing tea, uncertain how to respond to the observation and its implications. "Catherine called yesterday," he continued, watching Maria's movements. "She thinks Sophia should stay in Denver for Christmas rather than visiting here as planned. Says the winter travel is too challenging, too unpredictable." The disappointment in his voice was evident beneath the factual delivery. Maria set a mug of tea before him, the steam rising between them. "You disagree," she said, "not a question." "I think my daughter should be with her father for Christmas," he replied, hands curling around the warm mug. "I think Catherine is concerned about influences she can't control." The implication hung clearly in the air between them. "Me," Maria stated simply. Daniel met her gaze directly. "Partly." The honesty was both painful and appreciated, no attempt to soften the reality of the situation. "I could take time off during her visit," Maria offered. "Stay with Mrs. Abernathy or at the boarding house in town." "No," Daniel said with unexpected firmness. "That's not the solution." "Then what is?" He looked down at his tea, steam rising to obscure his expression momentarily. "I don't know yet, but hiding parts of my life from my daughter, isn't it?" The statement, simple, declarative, carried implications that made Maria's pulse quicken uncomfortably. "What part of your life am I exactly?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked up, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't witnessed before. "I'm still figuring that out." The admission, honest, unguarded, created a moment of suspended possibility between them. "I should go," Maria said, standing abruptly. "It's getting late." He nodded, not attempting to prolong the conversation or clarify his statement. "Thank you for being here tonight. It meant a lot to Sophia." "She's a special child," Maria replied, moving toward the door. Outside, the cold air cleared her thoughts, the snow crunching beneath her boots as she crossed to the garage. The apartment waited, its solitary window illuminated by the small lamp she had left burning. One town, one job. But the familiar refrain now competed with a new awareness that in trying to avoid attachments, she might have inadvertently formed the deepest kind. Not just to Daniel, with his quiet strength and careful words, but to Sophia, with her old eyes and serious considerations. To the rhythms of a household that had begun to feel less like employment and more like belonging. The silver locket felt warm against her skin as she prepared for bed, its emptiness suddenly an opportunity rather than an absence. December transformed Juniper Creek into a snow globe version of itself, rooftops laden with white, smoke rising. From chimneys in lazy spirals, pine trees along Main Street decorated with simple lights and red ribbons. The mountains loomed larger against the winter sky, their presence amplified by the blanket of snow that rendered the landscape in stark contrasts of white and shadow. In the sheriff's house, Maria hung modest decorations, a wreath on the front door, candles in the windows, a small tree in the living room that Daniel had cut from the foothills and carried home on his shoulder. The simple preparations highlighted, rather than disguised, the underlying tension that had developed since the video call with Sophia. A cautious distance had reasserted itself between them, not the impersonal spacing of employer and employee from Maria's first weeks, but a deliberate care in interactions, an awareness of undefined boundaries. Daniel worked longer hours, often returning after Maria had retired to her apartment. She left his meals covered in the oven, no longer lingering, to share them across the kitchen table. Christmas approached with increasing momentum, bringing with it the question of Sophia's visit. Unresolved despite several tense phone conversations between Daniel and Catherine that Maria pretended not to overhear from the kitchen. The weather cooperated with Catherine's concerns, delivering a major storm system that closed mountain passes and delayed deliveries to town. The general store's shelves grew sparse as supply trucks failed to arrive. The diner operated on a limited menu. Mail came irregularly, when it came at all. "Worst December in 15 years, Mrs. Abernathy declared when Maria ventured to the store for essential supplies. "They're saying another system's coming through next week, might not clear out until after New Year's." The news cast a pall over Daniel's already subdued mood when Maria relayed it that evening. They stood in the kitchen, she preparing vegetables. For soup, he recently returned from helping clear the Sullivans' driveway after a tree fell across it. "Catherine will use this as final justification," he said, staring out the window at the heavy clouds gathering on the horizon. "No Christmas visit." "I'm sorry," Maria offered, the simple condolence inadequate against his evident disappointment. He turned from the window, his expression resolute despite the sadness evident in the set of his shoulders. "Sophia's disappointed too, said so directly on our call yesterday." Maria nodded, continuing to chop carrots with precise movements. "She's developing her own voice, that's important." "Yes," Daniel agreed, watching her work with unusual intensity. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about carrying the past with us without being trapped by it." The reference to their conversation on the porch after the festival surprised her. "Oh? I've been holding patterns that don't serve anyone, not me, not Sophia. Keeping her room exactly as it was when Elena was alive. Letting Catherine make decisions I should be making as Sophia's father." He moved to the counter, picking up one of the carrots Maria had yet to chop, turning it in his hands as if examining evidence. "I've decided to renovate Sophia's room," he continued, "not to erase what was, but to create something that reflects who she is now, not who she was at 7. "That sounds like a thoughtful change," Maria replied carefully. "I'd like your help with it," Daniel said, setting the carrot down and meeting her eyes directly. "You seem to understand her in ways I'm still learning to." The request, simple yet profound in its implications, created a moment of suspended possibility between them. "Of course," Maria agreed finally, "if you're certain." "I am." His certainty extended beyond the immediate topic, suggesting decisions made about multiple aspects of his life. "And I've told Catherine that I expect Sophia for Easter, regardless of weather or other concerns. I'm her father. It's time I acted fully in that role." The declaration carried a quiet authority that reminded Maria of her first impression of him, the solid presence that anchored spaces around him. "That's good," she said simply, returning to her chopping. "Sophia needs that." Daniel remained beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool kitchen. "What about you, Maria? What do you need?" The question, direct, unexpected, made her knife pause mid-cut. "I'm not sure anyone has asked me that in a very long time," she admitted. "I'm asking now." Maria set the knife down carefully, buying moments to consider. What did she need? The question peeled back layers of practiced self-sufficiency, of deliberate disconnection, to reveal something tender and uncertain beneath. "Stability, perhaps," she offered finally, "but on my own terms. Not dependence." Daniel nodded, accepting, her halting response with characteristic patience. "And how long do you plan to stay in Juniper Creek?" The question that had once seemed so straightforward now carried complications Maria had never anticipated when stepping off the bus months earlier. "I'm not sure anymore," she confessed. "My plans seem to have evolved." "Plans do that," he observed, a hint of gentle humor in his tone, "especially when they encounter other people's plans." The simple wisdom of his statement broke the tension, allowing a small smile to curve Maria's lips. "Yes, they do." Daniel's own expression warmed in response. I should finish splitting wood before the next storm hits. That soup smells good. It will be ready in an hour, she replied, returning to her vegetables with more settled hands. As December deepened toward its darkest days, the promised second storm system arrived with brutal intensity. Snow fell in thick curtains, accumulating faster than the town's single plow could manage. Wind howled around corners and through cracks, finding every vulnerability in the weatherproofing of old buildings. The power failed midway through the third day, plunging Juniper Creek into a cold reminiscent of earlier centuries. Daniel brought firewood into the main house, building up the living room fireplace to provide both warmth and light. "You shouldn't stay in the apartment," he said when Maria arrived to check on him after the outage. "The space is too small to retain heat properly. The main house will stay warmer." The practical suggestion carried unavoidable intimacy, sharing living space, rather than maintaining the separate domains that had defined their arrangement. "I'll be fine," Maria insisted. "I have plenty of blankets." Daniel's expression grew stern in a way she hadn't directed at her before. "This isn't about preference, Maria. The temperature is dropping below 0 tonight. The apartment has poor insulation and no fireplace. It's not safe." The concern beneath his authoritative tone was evident, preventing her from bristling at the directive. "All right," she conceded. "I'll bring what I need for the night." Relief softened his features. "Good. I'll prepare the guest room." That evening they shared a simple meal cooked over the fire, canned soup heated in a cast-iron pot, crackers and dried fruit. The firelight cast elongated shadows across the living room, creating an intimate circle of warmth amid the storm's continuing assault. "It reminds me of camping with my father," Daniel observed, setting his empty bowl aside. "He believed every boy should know how to survive with minimal resources." "My grandfather was similar," Maria replied, the firelight making personal disclosures feel more natural. "He taught me which plants could be eaten, which had medicinal properties, how to find water in seemingly dry places. Useful skills. They've served me well," she acknowledged, "during difficult times." Daniel studied her across the firelight, expression thoughtful. "You've never mentioned what happened after your family died, where you went, what you did." The observation hung between them, not quite a question but an opening if she chose to take it. Maria's fingers found the silver locket at her throat, drawing comfort from its familiar presence. "I stayed with my grandmother until I finished high school. After she passed, I had no other family, no anchor to any particular place." She paused, gathering memories like scattered photographs. "I worked many jobs: waitress in Phoenix, housekeeper in a Santa Fe hotel, receptionist at a medical office in Albuquerque, sales clerk in Flagstaff, never for very long, never becoming essential anywhere." "A deliberate choice?" Daniel asked gently. Maria nodded, firelight catching the movement. "It seemed safer that way. No expectations, no disappointments, no one left behind when I inevitably moved on. And yet here you are," he observed, 6 months in one place." "Yes," she acknowledged, something loosening in her chest at the admission. "Here I am." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, wood shifting as it surrendered to transformation by flame. "What's in your locket?" Daniel asked unexpectedly. "I've noticed you touch it when you're thoughtful or troubled." Maria's hand fell away from the silver pendant, suddenly self-conscious of the habitual gesture. "Nothing, it's empty." "Why keep an empty locket?" "It was my mother's," she explained. "I've never found anything that seemed worthy of placing inside." Daniel nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Some spaces we keep open, waiting for the right thing to fill them." The metaphor hung between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to articulate. When the fire burned low, they retired to separate rooms, Daniel to the master bedroom, Maria to the guest room down the hall. The house creaked and settled around them as the storm continued its siege, wind finding every gap and corner to whistle through. Despite the extra blankets, the guest room remained cold, the chill seeping through walls never meant to withstand such temperatures without the assistance of modern heating. Maria lay awake, watching her breath form clouds in the dim light filtering through the curtains. A soft knock at the door preceded Daniel's voice. "Maria, "Are you awake?" "Yes," she answered, sitting up as he opened the door. He carried an additional quilt, his silhouette backlit by the emergency lantern in the hallway. "It's colder than I expected in here," he said, extending the quilt toward her. This helped Elena when she was always cold during her treatments. The offering, both the physical blanket and the personal memory attached to it, created a lump in Maria's throat. "Thank you," she managed, accepting the quilt. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, warm skin against cold. Daniel lingered in the doorway, a solid presence against the storm's chaos beyond the walls. "If you need anything else—" "I'm fine," Maria assured him. "Really?" He nodded once before retreating, pulling the door closed behind him. Beneath the additional layer, warmth gradually returned to Maria's limbs. The quilt carried a faint scent of cedar from storage, but beneath it something else, perhaps the ghost of perfume, or simply the impression of another woman's presence once held within its fibers. Elena's quilt, Elena's house, Elena's husband. The thought circled as Maria drifted towards sleep, the storm's howling transforming into a lullaby of elemental forces beyond human control. Morning arrived with shocking brightness, sunlight reflecting off pristine snow to create an almost blinding brilliance. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape and temperatures that rose quickly under the clear sky. Maria found Daniel in the kitchen, heating water for coffee on a camping stove. "Power's still out across town," he reported, "but the roads should be clear by afternoon. I need to check on some of the older residents, make sure everyone weathered the storm all right." The return to practical matters, to his role as sheriff and her position as housekeeper, provided a comfortable structure after the unusual intimacy of the previous evening. "I'll prepare food that won't spoil," Maria offered, "in case the outage continues." He nodded, pouring hot water over coffee grounds in a metal filter balanced above 2 mugs. "The guest room, was it warm enough with the extra quilt?" "Yes," she answered. "Thank you again for that." Daniel handed her one of the mugs, their fingers brushing again in the exchange. "It seems appropriate. Things finding new purpose, new—" He trailed off, eyes meeting hers over the rising steam. "New life," Maria completed softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of possibilities that had been circling unspoken for months. Before either could elaborate, the satellite phone Daniel kept for emergencies rang from the living room. The interruption broke the moment's spell, returning them to their defined roles with the efficiency of long practice. As Daniel went to answer the call, Maria gazed out the window at the transformed landscape, familiar shapes made new beneath the snow's blank canvas. One town, one job. But the mantra no longer carried its original meaning. What had begun as temporary shelter had developed roots she hadn't anticipated, connections she hadn't sought. The silver locket rested warm against her skin, its emptiness now feeling less like absence and more like invitation. January brought gradual thawing, not of snow which remained piled along Juniper Creek streets in dirty mountains, but of the careful distance that had developed between Maria and Daniel. The night spent under one roof during the storm had shifted something fundamental in their dynamic, creating a new ease that manifested in small everyday moments. Conversations extended beyond household management to personal preferences and observations. Meals were increasingly shared rather than prepared and left. The living room became common territory in the evenings, Maria reading in the armchair, while Daniel reviewed reports or cleaned his service weapon at the desk. Work on Sophia's room began as a weekend project, but expanded to fill evening hours. Together they emptied the preserved space, carefully packing clothes and toys into boxes for storage or donation. Walls once pale yellow were repainted in the soft sage green Sophia had mentioned preferring during a video call. The childish bed was replaced with a more mature frame, ordered from a catalogue and delivered on the weekly supply truck. "She's nervous about the changes," Daniel confided as they assembled the new bed frame. "Said she's worried she won't recognize her room anymore." Maria handed him the screwdriver, their fingers brushing in the exchange that had become comfortable rather than startling. "That's understandable. Change is difficult, even necessary change. I told her some things would remain the same, he continued, tightening a bolt with careful precision. Her mother's silver hairbrush, the quilt her grandmother made, the bookshelf her grandfather built. Continuity amid change, Maria observed. Like the mountains outside, always present but never quite the same from day to day, as light and weather transform them. Daniel paused in his work, looking up at her with an expression of quiet appreciation. You have a way of finding meaning in ordinary things. Not meaning, she corrected gently, just connections. The project continued through January's short days and long nights, the room gradually transforming from a shrine to the past into a space that honored both memory and growth. When Sophia's Easter visit was finally confirmed, Catherine reluctantly agreeing after Daniel's uncharacteristic insistence, the renovation gained new urgency. I want it finished before she arrives, Daniel explained as they hung curtains in the refreshed space. A surprise to show her she has a permanent place here, even if she only visits occasionally. Maria smoothed the fabric, admiring how the pattern of small silver stars against deep blue complemented the sage walls. She'll love it. It feels both new and familiar at once. That's the balance I was hoping for, he agreed, stepping back to assess their work. Like what we've created here. The observation hung between them, its meaning extending beyond the physical room to the less tangible space they had constructed, in each other's lives. February brought Valentine's Day, a holiday Maria had scarcely noticed in previous years, but now found herself unexpectedly aware of as red and pink decorations appeared in the general store and diner. The town's couples made modest celebrations, exchanging cards and small gifts with the pragmatic affection of people accustomed to the limits of rural resources. She had just finished cleaning the upstairs bathroom when Daniel appeared in the hallway, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I have something for you, he said, extending a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Nothing elaborate, just something that made me think of you. Maria accepted the unexpected gift with careful hands, the weight and dimensions suggesting a book. The paper fell away to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a simple mountain range silhouette. I noticed you writing sometimes, Daniel explained, as she opened the cover to find blank pages of heavy cream paper. Small notes on scraps. Thought you might like something more permanent. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, his quiet observation, of her habits, the selection of something both practical and meaningful, created a warmth in Maria's chest that had nothing to do with the house's heating. Thank you, she said, fingers tracing the embossed mountains. It's perfect. The woman at the bookstore in Cedar Ridge helped me choose it, he added, a hint of color touching his cheekbones above his beard. Said every important story deserves proper recording. The implication that her thoughts, her experiences constituted an important story, added another layer of meaning to the gift. I have something for you too, Maria admitted, surprising herself with the confession. Though I didn't wrap it. She reached into the pocket of her dress, retrieving a small object she had carried for days, waiting for the right moment. A carved wooden figure no larger than her thumb, a bear, simplified but recognizable, standing on hind legs in a posture suggesting watchfulness. I found it at Mr. Jenkins' stall in the winter market, she explained, placing it in Daniel's palm. He said the bear represents protection and strength, standing guard. Daniel examined the figure with careful attention, turning it to catch details in the simple carving. Like Sophia's silver owl. Yes, Maria confirmed. A connection, through similar but different objects. His fingers closed around the wooden bear, the gesture careful rather than possessive. Thank you. I'll keep it with me. The exchange, small gifts of minimal monetary value but significant personal meaning, marked a transition neither articulated aloud, but both recognized in the shift of atmosphere between them. That evening, Daniel built a fire despite the adequacy of the electric heating that had been restored weeks earlier. The flames created a center of warmth and light in the living room as snow began falling again outside, large flakes drifting past the windows in lazy spirals. Would you like tea? Maria offered, preparing to return to her apartment as she usually did after dinner cleanup. I would, Daniel replied, and your company, if you're not too tired. The invitation, offered with careful casualness that didn't quite disguise its significance, hung between them. I'm not tired, Maria said simply, moving to the kitchen to prepare the tea. When she returned with 2 steaming mugs, Daniel had shifted from his usual place at the desk to the couch, creating a space beside him that represented both invitation and question. Maria hesitated briefly before joining him, leaving a careful distance between them as she handed him his mug. Sophia called while you were in the kitchen, he said, blowing gently across the hot liquid. She's excited about her visit. Wanted to know if you'd still be here. What did you tell her? That I hoped so. His gaze remained on the fire rather than meeting hers, allowing the statement its full weight without pressure. Maria's fingers found the silver locket at her throat, the familiar gesture now less defensive reflex and more thoughtful consideration. I have no plans to leave. The simple declaration, a departure from her carefully temporary existence of previous years, felt both frightening and liberating. Daniel nodded, the movement barely perceptible in the firelight. I'm glad. They sat in companionable silence, watching flames consume logs in the eternal transformation of matter to energy. Outside, snow continued falling, muffling the world. Beyond the windows into peaceful silence. I've been thinking about what you said months ago, Daniel said finally, about carrying the past without being trapped by it. Maria turned slightly to study his profile, the strong lines softened by firelight. Yes? I think I'm finally understanding how to do that, he continued, his voice reflective. How to honor Elena's memory while allowing life to continue. How to be Sophia's father without trying to be her mother as well. That's significant, Maria observed softly. Not everyone manages that balance. I had help, he acknowledged, turning to meet her gaze directly. Someone who understood the process from her own experience. The recognition of what she had offered him, perhaps without fully realizing it, created a moment of profound connection between them. We help each other heal, Maria said simply, putting words to what had been developing between them for months. Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting both firelight and something deeper, more personal. Slowly, with the deliberate care that characterized his most meaningful actions, he extended his hand across the small space separating them on the couch. The gesture, not demanding, merely offering, allowed Maria complete freedom to accept or decline. After a moment's hesitation that acknowledged the significance of the choice, she placed her hand in his. Their fingers interlaced with the naturalness of puzzle pieces finding their complement, his calloused strength meeting her smaller but equally work-hardened grip. Nothing more happened that evening. No declarations, no further physical connection, just the simple, profound joining of hands as they watched fire and snow perform their ancient dance of transformation. When Maria finally rose to return to her apartment, Daniel walked her to the door, their hands remaining connected until the final moment of separation. Good night, Maria. Good night, Daniel. The exchange, ordinary words carrying extraordinary meaning, hung in the air between them as she stepped into the snowy night, crossing to her apartment with measured steps that left clear imprints in the fresh snow. From her window, she watched the main house for several minutes before the living room light finally extinguished. The silver locket felt warm against her skin as she prepared for bed, its emptiness increasingly feeling like potential rather than absence. One town, but no longer merely one job. Something far more complex and valuable had begun to take root in the fertile ground of shared understanding. March arrived with the gradual surrender of winter's grip. Snow retreated from sun-facing slopes, revealing patches of earth eager for warmth. Creeks swelled with meltwater, their voices changing from ice-muffled whispers to the confident gurgle of release. Juniper Creek itself seemed to exhale collectively, windows opening to admit fresh air, residents emerging from hibernation to reconnect in public spaces. In the sheriff's house, preparations for Sophia's Easter visit occupied both. Daniel and Maria. The renovated bedroom received final touches, framed photographs of mountains and wildlife selected by Daniel, a hand-woven blanket in shades of blue and purple that Maria found at the spring market. a small desk positioned beneath the window to capture natural light. Their collaboration had developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements and preferences without need for constant discussion. The careful physical distance maintained through winter had gradually relaxed, allowing casual touches, a hand at the small of her back as Daniel moved past her in the kitchen, Maria straightening the collar of his uniform before he left for work, fingers brushing when passing tools or dishes or books, small gestures building a language between them. Catherine arrived with Sophia on a Wednesday afternoon, driving the same sleek city-appropriate vehicle that had looked so out of place during their festival visit. Maria watched from the kitchen window as Daniel emerged from the house to greet them, lifting Sophia in a hug that spoke of months of physical absence. When Catherine's gaze lifted toward the house and caught Maria watching, she offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The gesture crystallized the complexity of the situation. Catherine's evident disapproval of Maria's continued presence, her protective instincts toward her niece, her reluctance to relinquish control of Sophia's upbringing. Maria stepped away from the window, busying herself with final preparation of the welcome dinner. The sounds of arrival filtered through the house, suitcases being carried upstairs. Sophia's excited voice as Daniel presumably led her to her renovated room. Catherine's more measured tones asking practical questions about weather and road conditions for her return journey. When they entered the kitchen, Sophia broke away from the adults to approach Maria directly, wrapping her arms around her waist in an unexpected hug. "You're still here," the girl said, face tilted up with evident pleasure. "I am," Maria confirmed, returning the embrace with gentle pressure, "and very happy to see you." "Dad said you helped with my new room," Sophia continued, releasing her but remaining close. "It's amazing. I love the star curtains and the bookshelf with all my favorite books already on it." "Your father chose most of those details," Maria clarified, conscious of Catherine's watchful presence. "He knows what you like." "But you helped," Sophia insisted with the direct perception of children. "I can tell." Catherine intervened with practiced smoothness, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Darling, why don't you finish unpacking?" "Before dinner? I need to discuss the schedule with your father." The suggestion, though phrased gently, carried unmistakable firmness. Sophia's expression dimmed slightly, but she nodded with the compliant response of a child accustomed to navigating adult tensions. "Will you help me organize my books later?" she asked Maria before departing. "If your father agrees," Maria replied, deferring to Daniel's authority in a way she hoped would ease Catherine's evident concern. When Sophia had gone upstairs, Catherine turned to Daniel with a smile that balanced politeness with determination. "Could we speak privately, for a moment, about the arrangements for next week's return?" The request, reasonable on its surface, contained layers of unspoken meaning that created a tangible shift in the kitchen's atmosphere. "Of course," Daniel replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Maria, would you mind checking if Sophia needs anything upstairs while we talk?" The redirection provided Maria a graceful exit from the uncomfortable dynamic, while acknowledging her role in the household extended beyond mere housekeeping. Upstairs, she found Sophia arranging books on her shelf, small fingers tracing titles with evident pleasure. "Dad remembered all my favorites," the girl observed as Maria entered. "Even the one about the girl who talks to mountains that we read during the video calls." "He listens carefully to what matters to you," Maria replied, sitting on the edge of the newly made bed. "That's what good fathers do," Sophia nodded, abandoning the books to join Maria on the bed. "Aunt Catherine doesn't want me to stay here," she confided suddenly, her voice dropping despite the closed door. "I heard her talking to her friend on the phone. She says Dad lives too far away and it's not a proper environment for regular visits." The revelation, offered with the uncomplicated directness of children, made Maria's heart constrict with complicated emotion. "Your aunt wants what she thinks is best for you," she said carefully, "just as your father does. Sometimes adults disagree about those things." "But what about what I want?" Sophia asked, the question containing wisdom beyond her years. "Doesn't that matter too?" Maria considered her response with the seriousness the question deserved. Yes, it matters. And as you get older, it will matter more. But right now, the adults in your life are trying to make decisions that keep you safe and happy, even when they disagree about how to do that. Sophia digested this, her small face solemn with concentration. I like it here, she said finally, with Dad. And with you. The simple declaration created a warmth in Maria's chest that mingled with an uncomfortable awareness of her potentially complicating role in the family dynamic. We like having you here too, she replied, carefully neutral in her phrasing. Now shall we organize these books, by author or by subject? The methodical task of arranging Sophia's small library provided structure for their interaction, allowing the girl to process her thoughts while engaged in practical activity, a technique Maria had observed Daniel employing during difficult conversations. Downstairs, the murmur of adult voices continued for several minutes before falling silent. When Maria and Sophia descended for dinner, they found Daniel setting the table, while Catherine arranged flowers in a vase with precise movements that suggested controlled tension. Everything all right? Maria asked Daniel quietly as she moved to retrieve serving dishes from the oven. Fine, he replied, his tone suggesting otherwise. Catherine has decided to stay through Saturday rather than leaving tomorrow as planned. The adjustment, seemingly minor, rippled with implications about supervision and observation of the household dynamics. Dinner proceeded with careful conversation, Catherine inquiring about Sophia's school performance, Daniel sharing sanitized versions of Sheriff Department activities, Sophia describing a science project involving plant growth rates. Maria remained largely silent, offering food and refilling glasses while observing the family interaction with attentive eyes. After Sophia had been tucked into her new bed with promises of hiking and picnicking the following day, the three adults settled in the living room. Catherine perched on the edge of the armchair, Daniel in his usual place on the couch, Maria standing uncertainly until he patted the cushion beside him in clear invitation. The seating arrangement, its implications impossible to ignore, created a visible tightening around Catherine's mouth. I've been considering Sophia's summer arrangements, she began without preamble. The program I mentioned last year, the one with horseback riding and swimming instruction, has an opening for the full 8 weeks. Daniel's expression remained neutral, though Maria felt the slight tension that moved through him at the transparent attempt to limit his time with his daughter. Sophia mentioned wanting to spend at least part of the summer here, he replied evenly. We discussed riding lessons at the Peterson Ranch during our last call. Catherine's smile remained fixed. Children often express preferences without understanding the practical considerations. Denver offers significantly more opportunities for her development. And I offer something equally important, Daniel countered, his tone firm but not confrontational. Her father's presence in her daily life, not just occasional visits. The fundamental disagreement, present but usually veiled in politeness, surfaced more directly than Maria had witnessed before. Daniel, Catherine began, her voice taking on the patient tone one might use with a child, you know I value your relationship with Sophia, but this arrangement has worked well for years. Your situation here is limited. Her gaze flickered briefly to Maria before returning to Daniel, the unspoken concern clear in the gesture. My situation has changed, he replied simply, and continues to change. The statement, its meaning unmistakable, hung in the air between them. I see, Catherine said after a moment, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. Perhaps we should discuss this further when we're both less tired from travel. The strategic retreat carried no suggestion of changed position, merely deferred conflict. After Catherine retired to the guest room, silence settled in the living room. Not the comfortable quiet that had developed between Maria and Daniel over months of evening companionship, but something more weighted with implications. I'm sorry, Maria said finally. My presence complicates things for you and Sophia. Daniel turned to face her directly, his expression more open than it had been during the careful conversation with Catherine. Your presence clarifies things, Maria. For me and I think for Sophia too. The distinction, simple but profound, shifted something in her understanding of the situation. "Catherine doesn't see it that way," she observed. "Catherine sees what she expects to see," he replied. "A widower who shouldn't move forward, a housekeeper who shouldn't be more than an employee, a child who needs protection from change. Those aren't unreasonable concerns from her perspective," Maria pointed out gently. Daniel's hand found hers on the couch between them, fingers interlacing with now familiar ease. "No, but they're based on fear rather than growth, on preserving what was rather than building what could be." The philosophy, so aligned with Maria's own evolving understanding of grief and recovery, created a sense of profound connection between them. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, the gesture both soothing and stimulating. "What are we building, Daniel?" she asked softly, the question emerging from months of unspoken awareness. He considered his response with characteristic thoughtfulness, his eyes steady on hers. Something honest, something healing, something that honors the past without being limited by it. The definition, open-ended yet deeply specific, perfectly captured what had developed between them since her arrival in Juniper Creek. "I should go," Maria said reluctantly, aware of Catherine's presence upstairs and the complicated optics of remaining too long in the main house after normal working hours. Daniel nodded. Understanding her hesitation without requiring explanation, he walked her to the door as had become their custom, their hands remaining connected until the final moment of separation. "Maria," he said as she stepped onto the porch. "Whatever Catherine says or implies, know that you belong here, with Sophia, with me." The declaration, simple, direct, unambiguous, created a warmth that stayed with her as she crossed to her apartment through the cool spring night. Inside, she opened the leather-bound journal he had given her for Valentine's Day, pages still mostly empty despite 2 months of possession. The pen moved across the cream paper with unexpected certainty, recording feelings and observations that had remained unacknowledged for too long. The silver locket rested against her skin as she wrote, its emptiness no longer a void, but a space of possibility waiting to be filled. One town, one home. The evolution of her internal mantra reflected the transformation that had occurred since stepping off the bus in Juniper Creek 10 months earlier, from deliberate transience to conscious rooting, from isolation to connection. Outside her window, the mountains stood solid against the night sky, unchanging yet constantly transformed by light and weather and perspective. Like grief, like healing, like love in its patient, gradual unfolding. The remaining days of Sophia's Easter visit unfolded with unexpected harmony, despite Catherine's watchful presence. Mornings brought hikes into the foothills, the landscape transformed by spring's awakening, wildflowers emerging in surprising bursts of color among rocks and sparse grasses, creeks running clear and quick with snowmelt, birds returning to established territories with song. Catherine declined these excursions, citing inappropriate footwear or conference calls that couldn't be rescheduled, leaving Daniel, Maria, and Sophia to explore together. The natural world provided neutral territory where relationships could develop without the weight of household dynamics or Catherine's observations. "Look!" Sophia called during one such expedition, pointing to a narrow animal track winding through mud near a stream. "What made these?" Daniel crouched beside his daughter, studying the impressions with professional attention. "Deer probably passed through early this morning. Can we follow them?" the girl asked, excitement brightening her face. "For a little while," he agreed, his own expression reflecting pleasure at her enthusiasm. "What do you think, Maria? Up for tracking deer?" The inclusion, natural, unforced, contrasted sharply with Catherine's careful efforts to maintain separation between Maria and family activities. "I'd like that," she replied, joining them by the tracks. "My grandfather taught me to read animal signs when I was about Sophia's age." "Really?" Sophia's interest shifted immediately to Maria. "What kinds of animals?" As they followed the deer trail through budding aspen groves, Maria shared stories of her childhood in Arizona, tracking jackrabbits and coyotes with her grandfather, learning which plants indicated water sources nearby, identifying birds by their calls rather than their appearance. Daniel walked slightly behind them, his presence supportive but allowing the connection between Maria and Sophia to develop organically. Occasionally their eyes met over the girl's head, sharing silent appreciation of her curiosity and enthusiasm. These moments, simple, sun-warmed, filled with discovery, created a foundation no amount of Catherine's careful maneuvering could undermine. At the house, mealtimes developed a rhythm of their own. Catherine maintained polite conversation focused primarily on Sophia's education and future opportunities in Denver. Daniel responded with appropriate interest while subtly redirecting discussions to include his daughter's preferences and opinions. Maria moved between kitchen and dining room with practiced efficiency, present but allowing the family their space. Evenings found them gathered in the living room, Daniel reading reports in his armchair, Catherine reviewing documents on her laptop. Sophia and Maria often engaged in art projects or games at the coffee table. The arrangement presented a tableau of domestic normalcy that gradually softened some of the tension in Catherine's shoulders and expressions. On Friday evening, with Sophia already in bed and Catherine packing for their Saturday departure, Daniel found Maria in the kitchen, preparing the next day's farewell breakfast. "Thank you," he said simply, leaning against the counter as she worked. "For what?" "For navigating this week with grace," he elaborated. "For connecting with Sophia without undermining Catherine. For understanding the complexities without requiring explanation." Maria smiled, continuing to slice fruit for morning. "You give me too much credit. I simply tried to make things easier, not harder." "That itself is a gift," Daniel observed. "Not everyone would approach this situation with such consideration." The appreciation in his voice warmed her more than any fire could have. "I care about Sophia," she said simply, "and about making things workable for all of you." Daniel moved closer, his presence a comfortable warmth at her side. "Catherine asked me something interesting today, while you and Sophia were collecting flowers for the table." "Oh," Maria continued her methodical slicing, though her attention sharpened. "She asked if I was planning to marry you." The knife paused mid-cut, Maria's breath catching at the directness of the statement. "What did you tell her?" she asked carefully, not looking up from the cutting board. "That we haven't discussed it," he replied with characteristic honesty, "but that I wouldn't rule out the possibility for the future." The response, measured yet unmistakably affirmative, created a flutter of something between apprehension and anticipation in Maria's chest. "That's very good, forthright," she managed finally. Daniel's hand covered hers on the counter, stilling the knife entirely. "I've learned that clarity matters in important relationships, with Sophia, with Catherine, with you." The simplicity of his philosophy cut through potential complications with the same precision Maria applied to the fruit before her. "Catherine can't have been pleased with that answer," she observed, finally meeting his eyes. A hint of wry humor touched his expression. "She suggested I might be making impulsive decisions due to prolonged isolation." Despite the tension of the situation, Maria found herself smiling. 10 months hardly qualifies as impulsive in my experience." "My thought exactly," Daniel agreed, his own smile warming his eyes. Their gazes held for a moment of perfect understanding before footsteps on the stairs announced Catherine's approach. Daniel stepped back to a more proper distance, though his expression remained unguarded. "Ah, there you are," Catherine said as she entered the kitchen. "I was hoping to speak with you both before tomorrow." The formal phrasing suggested a prepared statement rather than casual conversation. "Of course," Daniel replied, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "Would you like coffee or tea?" Until the sheriff gave her a reason to stay. "No, thank you," Catherine declined, though she took the offered seat at the kitchen table. Her posture remained perfectly straight, hands folded precisely on the wooden surface, the embodiment of composed dignity. Daniel and Maria exchanged a brief glance before joining her, forming a triangle of carefully maintained space and unspoken awareness. "I've been observing this household dynamic for several days now," Catherine began, her tone balanced between professional assessment and personal concern. "And while I initially had reservations about the arrangement, I find myself reconsidering certain assumptions." The unexpected direction of her comments created a momentary silence. Maria's hands settled in her lap, fingers intertwining with the same nervous energy that had led her to touch her locket in times of uncertainty, though the pendant itself remained still against her throat. "I appreciate your candor," Daniel replied, his expression open but guarded. Catherine nodded once, acknowledging his response. "I've always prioritized Sophia's well-being. After Elena passed, the arrangement we established seemed the most stable option for a child who had already experienced significant loss." "You've been an excellent guardian," Maria offered quietly. "Sophia speaks of you with great affection and respect." Something in Catherine's expression softened at this unexpected affirmation. "Thank you. That means a great deal." She paused, gathering thoughts that seemed to have been carefully prepared. "What I've observed this week is a child who appears more animated, more engaged than I've seen in some time, particularly in this environment." Daniel remained silent, allowing Catherine's observations to unfold without interruption. "I initially attributed her excitement solely to spending time with her father," Catherine continued, her gaze shifting to Maria. "But it's become evident that your presence is also a significant factor in her comfort here." The acknowledgement, clearly difficult for a woman accustomed to being the primary female influence in Sophia's life, carried unexpected grace. "Sophia is a remarkable child," Maria replied carefully. "Connecting with her has been a natural process." Catherine's smile held a hint of sadness. "She doesn't form attachments easily, not since Elena. The fact that she's opened herself to you speaks volumes about what you've offered her." The conversation had taken a turn neither Maria nor Daniel had anticipated, creating a charged atmosphere of possibility rather than conflict. "What are you suggesting, Catherine?" Daniel asked directly, his tone respectful but firm. His sister-in-law's hands unfolded, then reformed their careful placement on the table. "I'm suggesting that perhaps our current arrangement deserves reconsideration, that Sophia might benefit from more time here in this household than I previously believed appropriate." The concession, significant in its implications, hung in the air between them. "That would be," Daniel began, emotion making his usually measured speech less certain. "That would mean a great deal to both of us." Catherine nodded, her gaze moving between them with clear-eyed assessment. "I understand that your relationship has evolved beyond employer and employee. Daniel made that quite clear earlier today." Maria's cheeks warmed at the direct acknowledgement, but she maintained eye contact with the other woman. "Yes, though that was never my intention when I arrived." "I believe you," Catherine said simply. "Your concern for Sophia appears genuine rather than strategic. Your influence seems healthy." The approval, however qualified, represented a monumental shift from the carefully maintained disapproval of previous interactions. "What exactly are you proposing?" Daniel asked, bringing practicality to the emotional undercurrents. "A trial period," Catherine replied, with characteristic precision. "Sophia spends half the summer here rather than attending the full 8-week program in Denver. We reassess in September regarding more regular extended visits." The offer, generous by Catherine's standards, though still maintaining her oversight, represented a significant concession of control. "Thank you," Daniel said simply, the words containing volumes of meaning beyond their surface. Catherine's smile held both resignation and acceptance. Elena would want Sophia to know her father, to have a family, however, unconventionally constructed. Her gaze shifted to Maria, and I suspect she would approve of someone who clearly cares for both her husband and her daughter without attempting to replace her memory. The acknowledgement, perhaps the highest praise Catherine could offer, created a lump in Maria's throat that made immediate response impossible. "I should finish packing," Catherine said after a moment, rising with elegant efficiency. "Our flight leaves rather early tomorrow." After she departed, silence settled in the kitchen, not the tense quiet of conflict avoided, but the expansive stillness of unexpected possibility. "That was," Maria began, unable to find adequate words. "Her beginning," Daniel supplied, reaching across the table to take her hand, "of something new, The simple touch grounded her in the reality of what had just occurred, the first official acknowledgement of their relationship, the first concrete step toward a more integrated future. Outside the window, dusk painted the mountains in deepening purple, the fading light transforming familiar shapes into mysterious silhouettes. Yet unlike the emptiness of twilight that had greeted Maria on her arrival in Juniper Creek, this evening held the promise of dawn to follow, of continued light rather than extended darkness. The silver locket rested warm against her skin, as Daniel's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, two symbols of connection, one representing what had been, one what might yet become. Summer settled over Juniper Creek with languid assurance, days stretching long and golden as the sun lingered above the mountain ridges. Heat shimmered across the landscape, transforming distant vistas into wavering mirages that appeared and disappeared with the breath of occasional breezes. The weeks following Sophia's Easter visit brought gradual but significant changes to the rhythm of life in the sheriff's household. The careful boundaries that had defined Maria's position for nearly a year dissolved through deliberate decisions rather than accidental erosion. The first change came when Daniel suggested she move her few possessions from the apartment above the garage into the main house. "The guest room is larger," he observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies emerge at dusk. "More comfortable. Closer." The invitation, practical on its surface while deeply personal in its implications, hung between them in the warm evening air. "People will talk," Maria noted, though without particular concern. Daniel's expression held quiet amusement. "People already talk. Mrs. Abernathy has been planning our wedding reception menu since Valentine's Day, according to the baker." The observation startled a laugh from Maria, a sound that had become increasingly common in recent months. "And that doesn't bother you? The assumptions, the expectations?" He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness, gaze moving to the distant mountains now silhouetted against the darkening sky. "There was a time when it would have, when I believed maintaining certain appearances mattered more than authentic living." "And now?" Maria prompted when he fell silent. Daniel turned to face her directly, his expression open and unguarded in a way that still surprised her occasionally. "Now I understand that life offers limited opportunities for genuine connection, for building something meaningful from the broken pieces we all carry." The philosophy, simple yet profound, resonated with Maria's own evolving understanding of loss and recovery. "Besides," he added with a hint of dry humor, "the sheriff is permitted certain eccentricities in a town this size." 2 days later, she moved her modest belongings into the guest room, though guest no longer accurately described the space, as she arranged her clothes in the dresser and placed the photograph of her family on the nightstand. The transition occurred without ceremony, but with quiet significance, acknowledged by both in small, meaningful gestures rather than grand declarations. The second change came in the form of a letter delivered to the sheriff's office rather than the house, an official document requiring Daniel's signature to modify Sophia's custody arrangements. The agreement, carefully crafted by Catherine's attorney, formalized the summer arrangement discussed in the kitchen months earlier, while establishing a framework for potentially expanded visitation in the future. "She's being strategic," Daniel observed as they reviewed the document together at the kitchen table. "Maintaining primary custody while allowing for evolution rather than revolution." "It's a generous beginning," Maria replied, studying the formal language that represented such personal matters. "More than I expected after the festival." Daniel nodded, signing his name with deliberate strokes in the indicated spaces. "Catherine prioritizes Sophia's well-being above her own preferences. It's one of her finest qualities, even when it leads to difficulties between us." The fair assessment, acknowledging complexities rather than reducing relationships to simplistic categories, exemplified the thoughtful perspective that had drawn Maria to him initially and continued to deepen her respect. June brought Sophia for the first extended summer visit, 4 weeks that would test the new arrangements and relationships in ways theoretical discussions could not. Catherine delivered her personally rather than putting her on a plane, staying 2 nights to ensure smooth transition before returning to Denver. "The house feels different," she observed during a moment alone with Maria in the kitchen. "More inhabited." The assessment, neutral rather than critical, invited response without demanding it. "Daniel's been making changes gradually," Maria replied, careful to credit him with the household's evolution, updating rooms that had remained static for years, adding life to spaces that had become mere shelter. Catherine nodded, her gaze moving around the kitchen where colorful pottery now brightened shelves and herbs grew in small pots along the windowsill. "It's good, different from Elena's approach, but fitting for who lives here now." The acknowledgement, simple, yet profound in its acceptance, eased something that had remained tight in Maria's chest, despite the progress of recent months. After Catherine's departure, the three of them settled into patterns both familiar and novel. Breakfast shared before Daniel left for work, Maria and Sophia exploring town or foothills during the day, evenings spent together in comfortable domesticity that felt increasingly natural rather than arranged. Sophia flourished in the environment, her customary solemnity giving way to increasing moments of unself-conscious joy. She developed friendships with several local children, collected wildflowers for the kitchen table without prompting, and began leaving her bedroom door open rather than carefully closed. Small shifts that signaled significant internal evolution. "She seems different here," Daniel observed one evening as they watched Sophia reading on the porch swing, her face illuminated by the warm glow of sunset. "More herself somehow." "Children respond to emotional weather as much as actual climate," Maria replied, the observation drawn from her growing understanding of child development. "The atmosphere between adults creates the environment in which they either flourish or withdraw." Daniel's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with now familiar ease. "You've helped create that atmosphere, not just for Sophia, but for me too." The acknowledgement, honest and direct, warmed Maria more than the summer evening could account for. July brought Juniper Creek's Independence Day celebration, a modest small-town affair compared to Denver's elaborate festivities, but meaningful in its community-centered approach. The town square filled with picnic blankets and folding chairs, as families gathered for music, food, and eventually fireworks launched from the empty field behind the school. Maria found herself unexpectedly included in numerous conversations. No longer the sheriff's housekeeper of ambiguous status, but increasingly recognized as his partner, a role that carried its own place in the town's social hierarchy. "We're so pleased you decided to make Juniper Creek your home," Mrs. Abernathy declared, patting Maria's hand with grandmotherly affection. "The sheriff's been alone too long, and that child needs a woman's influence." The assumption of permanence, of established relationship rather than evolving arrangement, might have alarmed the Maria, who had stepped off the bus 14 months earlier. Now she found herself accepting such comments with the same quiet grace Daniel had demonstrated for years. "Thank you," she replied simply. "It's become important to me too." As darkness fell and families positioned themselves for the coming display, Daniel spread a blanket in a quiet corner of the square. Sophia sat between them, her small form leaning comfortably against Maria's side as they tilted their heads skyward in anticipation. "Look!" the girl exclaimed, as the first burst of color illuminated the night sky, her face transformed by wonder, despite having seen far more elaborate displays in Denver. Each explosion painted their upturned faces in momentary brightness, red, blue, gold, green, before returning them to the intimate darkness that cradled their small family unit. Between bursts, Daniel's hand found Maria's behind Sophia's back, fingers intertwining in silent communion. The perfect moment, simple yet profound. In its completeness, crystallized something that had been forming within Maria for months. This was belonging. This was home. Not a physical location, but a constellation of connections. To Daniel with his quiet strength and thoughtful perspective, to Sophia with her serious eyes and gradually blooming confidence, to the community that had shifted from backdrop to context for a life being consciously constructed rather than merely endured. Later that night, After Sophia had been tucked into bed with stories and the promise of lake swimming the following day, Maria stood at the bedroom window watching heat lightning play across distant mountains. The silver locket hung from her fingers rather than around her neck, its empty interior catching occasional flashes of illumination. Daniel's reflection appeared in the glass as he entered the room, moving to stand behind her with respectful distance maintained, a continuing consideration despite their evolving relationship. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Maria turned, the locket still suspended from her fingers. "I've been thinking about empty spaces," she said, "and how they're not always absences." His expression invited elaboration without demanding it, the patient attention that had created space for her to unfold gradually rather than all at once. "This locket was my mother's," she continued, opening the small silver oval to reveal its vacant interior. "I've carried it for years, touching it for reassurance but never filling it, as if putting something inside would be replacing memories that should remain untouched." Daniel nodded, understanding evident in his eyes. "Preservation rather than evolution." "Yes," she confirmed, appreciating as always his ability to distill complex emotions into clear concepts. "But I've been reconsidering that approach." She reached into her pocket, retrieving a small object carefully wrapped in tissue paper. As the covering fell away, a miniature photograph was revealed. Not the family portrait she had carried for years, but a new image captured during their Independence Day celebration. Daniel, Sophia, and herself, faces illuminated by sparklers Sophia had insisted on waving, despite being nearly too old for such amusements. 3 smiling faces. 3 intersecting lives. With deliberate movements, Maria fitted the tiny photograph into the locket's interior, where it settled perfectly within the silver frame. "The past remains honored," she explained, closing the locket with a soft click. "But now the present has equal space." The symbolism, simple yet profound, created a moment of suspended possibility between them. Daniel moved closer, his hand lifting to touch the locket now cradled in her palm. "May I?" At her nod, he carefully lifted the silver pendant, examining it with thoughtful attention before raising it to fasten around her neck. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin at her nape, lingering for a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary for the task. When the locket settled into its familiar place against her collarbone, it carried new weight. Not the burden of memory alone, but the balanced presence of what had been and what now was. "I love you," Daniel said simply, the declaration emerging, without preamble yet feeling perfectly timed in its quiet certainty. The words, unadorned by elaborate phrasing or dramatic setting, matched the man who offered them. Straightforward, honest, solid as the mountains that witnessed their unfolding story. Maria's hand rose to cover the locket, feeling her heartbeat. Beneath the metal that now held past and present together. "I love you too," she replied, the words emerging with the naturalness of long-held truth finally spoken. The declaration required no grand gestures or immediate escalation. Like everything in their gradually constructed relationship, it simply became another foundation stone laid with care and consciousness. That night, for the first time, Maria slept in Daniel's room rather than the guest space she had occupied for months. The transition occurred without discussion or ceremony, a natural evolution rather than dramatic shift. His arm wrapped around her waist as she drifted toward sleep, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. Outside the window, stars wheeled in familiar patterns across the summer sky, constant yet ever-changing as the earth moved through its ordained cycles of darkness and light, absence and presence, solitude and connection. August brought wedding. Preparations. Modest arrangements for a small ceremony to be held in the town square beneath the cottonwood trees that had witnessed seasons of community gatherings. The decision, like most significant choices in their relationship, emerged from quiet conversations rather than grand proposals or elaborate plans. "We could wait until after Sophia returns to Denver," Maria suggested as they discussed potential dates. "Avoid complicating her visit with changes she might find unsettling." Daniel considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness, his expression reflective in the evening light filtering through kitchen windows. Or we could include her directly in the process, allow her to participate in creating this new chapter rather than presenting it to her as a completed event. The perspective, prioritizing integration over protection, represented significant evolution in his approach to parenting and family construction. "What do you think she'll feel about it?" Maria asked, the question containing genuine concern rather than hesitation about their own decision. "I think," Daniel replied carefully, "that she already considers you family in ways more meaningful than legal designations. The ceremony would simply formalize what she already understands to be true." His assessment proved accurate when they presented the possibility to Sophia over breakfast the following morning. The girl's serious face brightened with immediate enthusiasm rather than confusion or concern. "Can I help plan it?" she asked, practical considerations immediately following emotional acceptance. "Aunt Catherine taught me about proper event organization." The request, earnest in its desire for inclusion, created a perfect bridge between her Denver life and Juniper Creek existence. "We're counting on your expertise," Daniel assured her, his hand covering Maria's on the table between them. "This involves all three of us, not just the two of us." The weeks that followed brought the town's gentle participation in their preparations. Mrs. Abernathy coordinated food arrangements with unnecessarily elaborate planning sessions. The baker experimented with cake recipes that required frequent sampling and assessment. Mr. Jenkins crafted simple silver bands that he insisted were his wedding gift rather than commission. Catherine's response to their announcement came in the form of a carefully worded letter that arrived precisely 3 days after their phone call sharing the news, enough time for considered response rather than immediate reaction. "Daniel and Maria, thank you for sharing your decision with me directly, rather than allowing me to learn of it through Sophia. The consideration demonstrates the thoughtfulness I've come to respect in both of you. While our relationship has contained its complications, I hope you know that my primary concern has always been Sophia's well-being. Observing her integration into your household this summer has confirmed what I began to recognize at Easter, that she flourishes in the environment you have created together. I am enclosing a small package containing Elena's favorite shawl. She expressed to me once that should anything happen to her, she would want it to bring comfort to whoever might eventually stand beside you and Sophia. I believe she would approve of it passing to Maria, who has demonstrated genuine care for the daughter we both loved. Sophia has requested permission to remain in Juniper Creek until the wedding rather than returning to Denver next week as originally planned. I have granted this extension with the understanding that she will resume her normal schedule when school begins in September. Please accept my sincere wishes for your happiness together. Catherine. The letter, formal, yet containing genuine acceptance, marked significant evolution in the complex relationship between the households. The shawl, a delicate creation of blue silk that matched the color Elena had favored in the photographs Maria had seen, represented a blessing that transcended conventional boundaries of past and present. August 28th dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony planned for late afternoon, when mountain shadows would provide natural cooling. Maria stood in the bedroom she now shared with Daniel, the blue silk shawl draped over her simple white dress as Sophia carefully arranged wildflowers in her braided hair. "There," the girl declared, stepping back to assess her work with critical attention. "You look beautiful." Maria turned to the mirror, observing the transformation from the woman who had arrived in Juniper Creek with nothing but a canvas bag and carefully maintained isolation. The face that looked back at her contained the same features, but carried new expressions. Serenity where wariness had dwelled, openness where guarded observation had dominated. The silver locket rested at her throat, now containing tiny photographs. On both sides, her original family on one, her new family on the other. Continuity amid change, just as the mountains outside witnessed transformations while remaining essentially themselves. "Are you nervous?" Sophia asked, her expression serious as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from Maria's skirt. "A little," Maria admitted honestly. But in a good way, like standing at the edge of something beautiful rather than something frightening. The distinction seemed to satisfy Sophia, who nodded with the wisdom of someone far beyond her years. Dad says the best decisions feel both exciting and peaceful at the same time. Your father is a very wise man, Maria observed, straightening the ribbon in Sophia's hair with gentle fingers. That's why he chose you, the girl replied with simple certainty. And why you chose him. The observation, direct and unembellished, contained profound truth within its childlike phrasing. The ceremony itself remained true to their shared preference for meaningful simplicity rather than elaborate display. 30 or so townspeople gathered in the square, chairs arranged in a semicircle beneath the cottonwood trees, whose leaves rustled with gentle percussion in the late afternoon breeze. Daniel waited beside the justice of the peace, his expression transforming from solemn anticipation to quiet joy as Maria approached with Sophia, walking proudly beside her. No formal procession or musical accompaniment marked their path, simply 3 people coming together to formalize connections already formed through months of conscious choice and shared experience. Vows exchanged beneath the open sky reflected the honesty that had characterized their relationship from its cautious beginnings to its confident present. I promise to honor your independence while offering connection, Daniel said, his voice steady and clear as he held Maria's hands in his. To respect your past while building our future, to walk beside you rather than ahead or behind as we navigate whatever paths open before us. I promise to remain fully present rather than perpetually departing, Maria replied, emotion making her voice softer but no less determined. To create home through relationship rather than location. To grow alongside you and Sophia, with roots deep enough to withstand storms, yet flexible enough to bend without breaking. Simple silver bands followed simple words, physical symbols, of the less tangible but more meaningful bonds already established between them. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss remained modest in deference to public setting and Sophia's presence, a gentle meeting of lips that contained promise of deeper connection in private moments, rather than public display. The gathering that followed felt more like community celebration than formal reception. Food shared at picnic tables decorated with wildflowers, music provided by local musicians who transitioned naturally between traditional wedding melodies and regional favorites, children including Sophia playing tag between the adults' conversations. As evening approached and stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Daniel found Maria at the edge of the celebration, her gaze directed toward the mountains, now silhouetted against the twilight gradient. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, his arm slipping around her waist with comfortable familiarity. Maria leaned into his solid presence, her head finding the perfect resting place against his shoulder. "Only that it took me 32 years to find this place, these people. You. Some journeys can't be rushed," he observed, wisdom evident in the simple statement. Some destinations can only be recognized after sufficient preparation. The philosophy, patient yet purposeful, perfectly encapsulated the path that had brought them together. Sophia appeared from the lingering celebration, slightly breathless from running but composed as she approached. "Mrs. Abernathy says you should cut the cake soon before the frosting gets too soft." "Practical considerations," Daniel noted with a hint of amusement, "always important." "We'll be right there," Maria assured her, reaching to tuck a strand of hair behind the girl's ear, a gesture of casual affection that would have been unimaginable during their first cautious interactions. Sophia nodded, but instead of returning immediately to the gathering, she moved to stand between them, all 3 facing the mountains as twilight deepened around them. "Are you happy?" she asked suddenly, the question directed at both rather than either individually. Daniel's hand settled on his daughter's shoulder, its weight both protective and encouraging. "Very happy. Are you?" The girl considered this with characteristic seriousness before nodding once, a decisive movement containing certainty rather than mere agreement. "Yes. It feels right, like pieces fitting together properly after being mixed up for a long time." The assessment, simple, yet profound in its accuracy, created a moment of perfect understanding between the 3 of them. As they turned back toward the celebration, Maria's hand found her locket through the delicate fabric of Elena's shawl. The silver pendant no longer represented absence or emptiness, but fullness, past and present, contained within a single object, just as her heart now held both memory and possibility, in balanced measure. One town, one family, one life deliberately chosen rather than merely accepted. Beyond the town square, the mountain stood sentinel against the deepening night, unchanging yet constantly transformed by light and shadow, season and weather. Like grief, like healing, like love in its patient, gradual unfinding of what waits beneath pain's protective layers, Maria Guerra Blackwood stepped back into the circle of light and community, no longer a woman with nothing, no longer planning to leave as soon as circumstances allowed. She had found her reason to stay,